throughout recent years, we've seen a shift in the service industry from delivering great customer service to delivering an on-brand customer experience. And in some of the other sessions that we've had, we've looked at how you can deliver brand through things like design, through your F&B. And what we're going to look at in today's session is how you deliver that brand experience through your staff. So let's first of all tell you who we are. So Charlene.
So I'm Charlene Nyantekyi. I'm General Manager for Club Wembley over at Wembley Stadium. Hopefully a lot of you got to sort of see a bit of our experiences on Wednesday night. And over to
Yeah, and I'm Natasha Thiebaut, so I work for a company called BLUEROCK. We're a venue strategy company. And before that, I was at IMG for nearly 20 years working on premium seat and sponsorship projects. I've worked on all kinds of venues around the world, from Wembley Stadium, the Maracanã in Brazil. I've worked on venues in Russia and Turkey and Ireland. And recently I've been working on some of the new stadiums being designed in Qatar for 2022. And I work with clients on designing new premium seat programs, so looking at things like design and F&B and sales and marketing. But one of the things I'm absolutely passionate about is customer experience, and I know that's the same for you, Charlene.
Absolutely.
So what are we going to look at? So we're going to look at what's branded customer experience versus what's good customer experience. It's a fairly new area for venues, I think. I mean, some of you may tell me that you're doing this brilliantly, and I don't want to teach people how to suck eggs, but we're going to look at a couple of examples from other industries, just because I think it's interesting. I spend most of my time going around looking at how other brands do this, and how they interact with me, and how they talk to me, and what the experience is like. So, and then Charlene's going to give us a case study of Wembley. And then we want to give you some practical tips and hints on how you might go about creating your own branded customer experience. And thank you for being here, because it's the last session, and I know that most of you probably want to get home and enjoy your weekend. So, and we'd love it to be interactive as well. So if any of you, think of stuff as we're going along, just raise your hands, and we're more than happy to jump in. Yeah. Okay. So I think hopefully most of us know what good customer experience is. What do we mean by branded customer experience? I think what we're talking about is delivering a service that's appropriate for your brand and appropriate for your customers. And it's about really creating an emotional connection with your customers that helps you to deliver the values of your brand and the promises of your brand. To deliver an experience that's considered, hopefully, and to deliver an experience that's unique to you. Okay? So I think it might just be quickly worth touching. Again, don't want to teach you how to suck egg, but just the difference between brand and visual identity, because I think a lot of people, when they talk about brand, they think about the logo, they think about the colours, they think about the typeface, but they don't necessarily think about the emotional experience. And one of the ways I like to think about it is that your logo is like your face and your brand is your personality. Okay? So I don't think there are actually even any logos here, but pretty much I'm sure most of you can tell me what this brand is. Roy, you touched on it earlier, and I think they do. They engage amazingly with you as a brand. This is the TV ad. You can see how the branded space is really on brand. But what we're here to talk about today is the staff, and so how do Virgin do that differently? Have any of you flown on a Virgin flight recently? Oh, no, well, Roy. I think. If you have, I mean, most flight attendants are trained to be helpful and knowledgeable and smiley, but I think Virgin, their staff do something a little bit different, from the way they're dressed to the way they interact with you. And Virgin's brand attributes are to be stylish, helpful, up-to-date, dynamic, innovative, and fun. And I think what you experience when you interact with a Virgin flight attendant is, you're really engaged in that Virgin-ness. You're really immersed in the brand. And this is something I heard yesterday. It's Virgin's recruitment sort of statement that they use, and it's recruit for attitude, train for skill. And what they mean by that is that when the type of people that they're trying to recruit really echo those brand values in their DNA. That's the kind of people they are. So they're innovative, they're stylish, they're dynamic, they're fun. And then the skills, you can train them to do that. You can train them to do the safety talks and to serve people. But they've really got to have that the Virgin brand in the DNA and how they interact with customers. Completely opposite end of the spectrum. You may love or hate the experience of going to IKEA. I seem to have just moved house, so I spent a lot of time there on Sundays. But again, from the shopping experience to the food experience, the touch points are considered. It's a completely different experience to Virgin, and it's again reflecting IKEA's brand values, which are to be Swedish, well-designed, functional, and low-priced. So everything from the cafe to the kids' play areas, all of those are reflecting that IKEA brand. And the staff as well. The way they're dressed, the way they interact with you. If you ask them a question, they take you to a computer terminal, they usually print something out, they'll draw you a little map, they'll show you where to get things. So again, it's just immersing you in that IKEA brand experience. Okay? So, real life experience, Charlene?
Absolutely.
Tell us how you're doing things.
Yeah, so for us, we've obviously gone through some recent product development pieces, and where we start on that is, kind of taking in our research, kind of trying to identify exactly what it is that our customers are looking for, and then it's kind of how do we go about growing that brand experience. So together with the FA, we actually have a recruitment policy, if you just want to sort of flick through. And it's kind of not dissimilar to some of the other brands that we've seen here. So actually it really starts from right at the beginning and looking at what we can do as a national stadium, which is slightly different from a club stadium. So I actually started off my career working for Arsenal Football Club over at Highbury Stadium, so 40,000 people there. Wembley, very different, 90,000 people. And so when you would kind of talk to some of our members from Wembley, they often refer to some of these clubs that they belong to. So whether that be Brighton and Hove Albion, whether that be sort of the Amex Stadium or some of these smaller venues. And one of the things they really kind of pick up on is the relationship that they have with the staff there. And they kind of talk about it being like a family, really integrated. They feel a sense of ownership there. And sometimes it's really difficult to replicate that when you're in a 90,000 capacity venue, and consistency of staff is a lot more difficult. So how do we try and address that? And I think it's about getting your staff to buy into what that brand identity is, and kind of even just small little touch points. So whether it's a staff mantra, which is welcome everybody a similar way, or telling everybody have a safe journey on the way back, kind of just learning one person's name, just try to get to know those little nuances are things that we can do as a bigger venue. It may seem like something very little, but actually it means a lot to the people that we've got there. So if we kind of flick through. So this is actually the brand values which the FA have. So before we do any interviews at all, we look at this little list of words here, which actually spells out pride. So it's progressive, it's respectful, inclusive, determined, and excellent. And throughout the interview process, we have a checklist, and we make sure that people actually, tick some of the boxes of progressive, respectful, inclusive, determined, and excellent. Because if they don't, then they're not going to fit into our values and our morals. So it's really kind of key that from the beginning, that we get the right people who embody the brand that we want to try and deliver. As we kind of go through and look at those brands, it's about kind of creating the energy and the environment of the experience. So we've got a number of different memberships we have. Sort of right at the top end, we've got something like the 120 Club, which is what we call a 5x5x5. So it's 5 options for a starter, main course, dessert. The level of service is very different there, versus the product that you see at the bottom, the Lioness, which is very much an entry-level gastro pub, essentially. So the types of service and the types of staff skills that you need there will be very different from one to the other. And this is kind of really shown in what our staff sort of look like and what they need to do in terms of their roles and responsibilities. So this is actually a picture here from the 120. So you can see here we've got staff sort of either dressed in suits or looking a little bit more formal. They're actually stood outside of the space itself, so they greet you before you actually walk into the restaurant space itself. It's very sort of high tech, very interactive. The staff are there to engage with you, to take you to your table, to kind of ask if there's anything sort of specific that they can do for you for that day. If you flick through to the next slide, this is the Lioness. It's a gastro pub.
Very different.
It's very different. So the way they dress, their approach is totally different. The skill set of the staff is obviously very different here. So the training that we would give to our members, to our staff in the 120 is very different to the training that we would give to these guys here. Very much with the customer in mind, but actually with the experience kind of top of the agenda there.
So we just wanted to give you now some practical tips on how you might go about trying to create those branded customer experiences for your venue. So really, these are the building blocks that you need to think about. So really starting with your brand, which might be Wembley, or your sub-brands, which might be the Lioness, the 120 Club. And it's really important when you create those sub-brands, it's not about just giving a name to the restaurant. You really need to create that brand for that space and think about what its identity is going to be. Touch points, it's really important to consider every single interaction that you have with your customer. So once you decide what the experiences that you want to deliver, make sure that you do that through every single interaction that your staff have with your clients. Because there's no point having a great experience in the lounge if it's let down by what happens in the car park. And similarly, your written communications as well. You know, we're going to look a little bit about tone of voice, and it's important that that's not just what when you write to people, but also that your staff echo those same words. We'll look a little bit about how your staff talk and then how they behave. And then just finally, just as you touched on, uniforms and how you can use the way that people dress, not just to be on brand in terms of colours, but to really create an emotional connection.
And I think just before we kind of move on, a great sort of mantra that I always kind of have in mind when we think about this is, it's not my fault, but it may be my problem. And I think if you kind of think that way as you're kind of working through these lines, it will really help you delve deep into the customer journey to make sure, even if it's not something that you own in terms of your remit, but if it goes wrong, they'll pick up the phone and they'll speak to you. So, it really does become your problem.
Yeah, very much. So, first of all, what kind of a venue and what kind of a brand are you? Now, we're not going to be able to go through everybody's specific venues here, but we just wanted to take 3 hypothetical situations just to look at how they might be able to create a different kind of emotional connection with their customers. So, heritage venue, you might have classical music, ballet, opera. Your audience or your clients might be a wealthy, older audience, and your brand values might be about tradition and excellence. And the experience that you want to deliver to your customer, therefore, might be formal and exclusive. And these are very much just some hypothetical examples just to just illustrate the point. If you're a sports venue, you're going to have live events, concerts, very much like Wembley. People are there for a big day out. Your brand values might be around creating memories and excitement, and the experience that you want to deliver might be more informal and fun. Let's take an educational family venue, so somewhere like a science museum. The audience would be families with an emphasis on children. Their brand values might be engagement and learning, and the experience that they want to deliver might be about being educational and exciting. So like I said, these are just very much hypothetical examples. But let's have a look at how you could then translate that into what we call tone of voice. So tone of voice is, again, translating your brand values into the words that you use. It helps you to create that emotional connection with your staff. You up for a bit of role play?
Yeah, let's do this.
So just to give you a different example, and I'm not, and saying this is what you should do, but it's just to give you that flavour of how you can engage differently with your clients to create a different emotional connection. So in a heritage venue, you might welcome your staff by saying, "Good evening, madam. Please come in. I do hope you enjoy the music this evening."
I thank you very much.
Now, you're all about the football, Charlene.
Absolutely. So this might be less formal. So it might be, "Evening, sir. I reckon we can get a result tonight. You're in the row 3, right side. Enjoy the match."
And a family venue might be, "Hi, kids. You ready to learn about space travel? Let's get you to mission control." So I think, can you understand that we're just, it's creating this, you're welcoming customers, but in a very different way and creating a very different emotional connection.
And I think it's fair to say if you're a venue which hosts multiple events, it's kind of using your key stakeholders, your event owners, to help you get that message across. So as an example, I use the phrase, "I've been NFL'd this week." So we have 3 NFL matches coming up over the next 3 weeks. And what they do incredibly well is they bring in their team to help engage with our staff. So actually, it's mandatory that every single staff that works at an event does at least 1 NFL training. And that's really so they can get to understand what NFL is all about, not just in terms of the event itself, but what it means, what the NFL means, and especially what it means when it's going away from its sort of natural home. Equally, they open up some additional customer service sessions for us. And then once you've kind of gone through that induction process, every team member then goes away with a badge which says NFL teammate. And then you kind of go through this NFL kind of walk of fame where sort of people sort of high five you as you go across. Now, that is a great example of an event owner coming into our venue, which is very sort of, a very different event from what we're used to doing. But for our staff to get the buy-in and to really enjoy it, they knew that they had to do that. So that's something to kind of bear in mind, depending whether it's Taylor Swift, whether it's Ed Sheeran or an NFL match. If it's something different from what you're used to, then make sure you use your event owners to get that message across.
Yeah, that's great. And just a couple more examples. We've done enough role play.
Unless anybody else wants to give it a go.
I think, each one of you will have different brand values and have, different experiences that you want to create. But I think one thing that most brands have in common is at some point you'll be needing to decide whether the experiences you want to deliver are more on the formal or the informal side. And the way let's have a look at how you can use your staff to do that. So we just did a little bit there on the welcome greeting, but are you going to address your clients by their first name? Are you going to call them Sir, Madam? Are you going to call them Mr. Smith? That's a decision that you need to make, and it needs to be consistent. Similarly, you can create a mood by the way that your catering staff might describe the food to somebody. So on the very casual way, it might be, oh yeah, it's yummy, it's scrumptious. On a more formal way, it might be, yes, divine, absolutely exquisite. And again, you're going to create a very different emotional connection with that customer. And it's just about finding what's appropriate. As well as the way your staff talk and the language you use, the way your staff behave. So the different ways of serving them. So, with serving a cup of coffee, it might be simply putting a mug on the table, very informal, or serving burgers on a board like you do in the Lioness, going to putting a cafetiere on the table, or at the very formal end, serving from a silver coffee jug. Similarly, how your staff take the order. Do they sit down next to your client and have a chat with them and lean on the table? Or do they have a menu board and point things out? Or do they have a leather-bound, beautiful, branded menu that they put on the table? Again, it's just creating a very different emotional connection with your customer. Uniform. So we touched on this a bit before, and I think, Charlene, you've got a great example there of the different. It's not just about having the right branded colours and the right logos. It's about the experience.
Absolutely.
There was a great example yesterday from Ascot of, they have the bowler hats and the top hat staff, and that's right for Ascot. That's not right for Wembley. But I think it's really important just to think that the tone of the service can be set by the attire of your staff.
Yeah, and I think that's really important in everything that we do at Wembley Stadium, especially because our offers are so different. What you get on one side of the stadium is very different from what you get from somewhere else. And actually, as a staff member, is having that pride as well in wearing the uniform. There's an element of aspiration there. So it may be that you're on one of the concourses working in a bar, but you see a colleague who's working in the 120 or in a box who's wearing something a bit more formal. And then there's an aspiration there for staff as to what's that person done to get to that point? Is it more training? Is it being more engaged? And making sure that as kind of key stakeholders that we recognise, acknowledge and reward. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself.
No, and just fine. Another thing that uniform can actually break down barriers, and I think this, again, you wouldn't have a staff like this in the 120 club, but if it was in a fan zone, this is a staff wearing a football shirt and face paint, and I think that can sometimes break down the barriers, and you can feel we're all in this together, we're all part of the same team. So what are the challenges? Absolutely. Been there, done that, Charlene. So on the management level?
Definitely. It's kind of, walk the walk. Everybody in here are sort of in the game, at the top of their game, and if it doesn't come through you, then your staff won't pick it up either. So it's really imperative that you do get management buy-in, and if you're on that middle management tier, it's about making sure that the people above you buy into this as well. I mean, I've seen some great examples at other venues. I know sort of Delaware do it quite regularly, where they have their senior management team actually take up roles in various places across the building. So you will get sort of CEO working in a concession or whoever it is working on different levels, but it's really important that your staff see that you are walking the walk, so they do it too.
And then once you've got the buy-in from your own management, it's getting buy-in from all those suppliers who may have their own brand and their own way of doing things. And it's about engaging with them and saying, okay, well, it's great that you've got your way of doing things, but how do we all work together so that we deliver that seamless experience? So having all those touch points unified.
Yeah, so just to kind of talk a little bit about this. So, I mean, based on sort of Wembley Stadium, obviously, we have a number of different stakeholders. So IMG, who are responsible for our sales and services, Delaware North, who are our caterer. We have multiple agencies when it comes to our crowd safety. So it's important that actually we find those kind of key synergies and that everybody's very clear on not just what their roles and responsibilities are, but what the end game is, what we're trying to achieve from event to event. And I think, using some previous experiences where this has probably been a little bit more challenging, I actually spent a couple of years working with Formula E, sort of travelling around the world, sort of electric street racing, taking the premium product on the road globally. So obviously there's the challenge of trying to get that consistency of product, working with sort of local agencies or local suppliers, and making sure that they understand what it is that you're trying to achieve. Premium in South America might be very different to premium in North America or anywhere else across the world. So, it's about creating the right manuals, having the right processes in place and checkpoints in place. So all of your stakeholders really get what the end goal is and everybody buys into that.
Okay. Challenge number 2, your staff. So let's go back to that Virgin philosophy, which is recruiting for attitude and not recruiting for skills. And I think, it's obviously the biggest challenge for all of you who work in venues. You're not necessarily going to be able to do that with all of your temporary event staff, but certainly your managers, your team leaders, all of those people need to be really, have the attributes that you want to deliver as a brand. I think it's really important when you're training staff to not just say to them, these are the things we want you to do. It's really important to explain the brand to them and explain why it is that you want them to do that and get them to understand the difference. So if they're working in the 120 Club or if they're working in the Lioness, then it's understanding who the customers are, understanding the experience that we're trying to deliver. And I think, I was interested talking to Joanna from Ascot yesterday, and I think, again, with that attitude versus skills, that some people won't be comfortable working in the 120 Club and standing with their hands behind their back and offering a very formal service. So again, it's about getting the right people into the right areas so that they can deliver on your brand.
Excellent. And just kind of adding to that as well is, making sure that we're investing in our staff. I mean, I think quite often we're kind of guilty of putting staff in scenarios that they're not actually necessarily equipped for. So, we do have to take responsibility for this. I've kind of witnessed in my own venues, and I'm sure some of you would have experienced in your own, where somebody's ordered a drink that the staff doesn't quite understand. So the example of a customer ordering a Guinness, a pint of lager came back first. He said, no, I asked for a Guinness. Went away, a pint of ale came back. Third time lucky, he managed to get his pint of Guinness. But, for me, actually, I was looking at that member of staff thinking, what have we done? We've put you in a situation that you are clearly not ready for. That was not on that person, that was on us. So, we have a lot of responsibility to take to make sure that, attitude is right and people will adopt that, but we've got to make sure we're putting the people with the right skill set in the right areas.
And I think creating that framework, in my experience, people, they like to be told, how you want them to do things. If you explain it to them, people like to be given those parameters in which to work because they want to know if they're doing a good job. And I think, some venues, I think when you're training temporary staff, it's often, you have 3 things or 4 things or 5 things. I don't think you can really go much more than about 5 because I think, with temporary staff, it can be too much. But if you're going to give those 3 things or those 4 things, think about them really carefully and make sure that they're on brand for you and that what you're asking your staff to do might be a little bit different to what Charlene's asking her staff to do. So always considering that brand.
Yeah, so just before we move on, just out of interest, how many people here do sort of full debriefs with their staff after every event? Great, a couple of hands up there. And then how do you follow up with your staff after those debriefs in terms of any actions that need to be done? Sorry to pick on you, but...
I work for the SSC Arena in Belfast, and they've got their main mission is the best experience every time for all their visitors.
Brilliant.
From 5 to 95 years old, it's that sort of Disney
thing.
But they are very clear that their staff, we've had a big culture change towards ownership to make them feel part of, understand how important they are, even if they're on minimum wage, they are part of that evening. And so there is so much training around the customer centricity, the importance of the whole journey, every detail makes the whole experience, and the customer comes first and you have to go over and above. And it's really kind of thing, they get some great feedback. And they are debriefed, and there is an intranet hub for all those casuals and third parties to come together, share stories, give feedback. make complaints, be listened to, and just really creating that ownership.
Yeah, which is a fantastic example. I mean, there are so many places that I've seen where there's so much time and effort spent on collating feedback and information, but it doesn't go anywhere, and it's an absolutely pointless exercise. And we're only going to learn in terms of product development and also staff development if we actually utilise that information. I mean, we talk about data. That's really key data that we need to make sure that we're giving back and then kind of making those improvements for the next event.
Yeah, and finally, but probably most importantly, is your customers. Probably should have started with this actually. But I think, it's really about talking to your customers and understanding their experience, not just was their experience good and bad, not just was it good or bad service, but how did it make them feel? What was their emotional connection with your venue? What was their emotional connection with your brand? How did we deliver that? And I think it's, knowing whether that's right or wrong for them, because the customer is not going to be wrong. So if the experience for them isn't right, then maybe the brand isn't right. And I don't mean by that you've got to go back and do a rebrand, but it might be that somebody's bought the Lioness and it's just too informal for them. And the brand is wrong. So then they should be, really you want to upgrade them to the 120 Club.
Absolutely, hopefully.
So it's just having the right experience, and of course we're looking at more multi-experience lounges, so that has to be considered as well. But I think really only your customers can tell you if the brand and the experience is right for them.
And there's no such thing as bad feedback. I know it sounds very cliche, but it's all a learning, right? So you've got to take it on board. I think I mentioned this in a session earlier where there's an element of absolutely being careful that you're not just listening to the most vocal person in the room, but you're actually quantifying some of the experiences and feedback that you get, so you're not kind of moving in a direction which is suitable for the minority because they're loud, but not suitable for the majority of your event. So it really is about kind of how you collate that information, how you share that information, and then what you do to kind of move your products forward.
Great. So does anyone have any questions, or does anyone else have any experiences that they'd like to share with us? We've had one. I know everyone's probably getting hungry now and wanting their lunch, but...
I've got a question for Charlene.
Thanks, Roy.
Sorry. You said you've got multiple security, obviously an external third-party caterer.
Yeah.
Do they all go through the Wembley induction?
Yeah, so actually we have different levels of induction. So using Delaware North as an example, they have quite a strenuous induction, so you actually don't make it onto the floor until you've passed this first sort of series of tests. And for me, that's kind of very key. I think, let's not be naive here. We all have our challenges with the consistency of staff. So if you're kind of them sort of going out to third parties, and those checks will still be in place, but it's really difficult to make sure that you're really getting that quality through and through, which is why I say, with Andy in the room today, actually I'm really pleased that we've had more Spurs events, because we've been able to give people more events to work and therefore get that consistency of staffing up a little bit more. I think it will absolutely be a massive challenge for us when with the number of events drops down again. But again, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't give up. I think it's about how you invest. So we had a really interesting piece of feedback which came off at our last event, where a member sort of talked about the new Lioness Lounge and said, oh my God, it's fantastic, this is really great, it's an amazing experience. But what's happening with the training in your staff? And I thought that was absolutely crucial because, again, you can do all the shiny bells and whistles that you like and you can create all these amazing spaces, but actually if you don't have the quality and consistency of staff to help deliver those experiences, it means absolutely nothing.
Another question from me, actually. What about where you've got a naming rights sponsor, or so you've got EE? How does that, then affect? Do you have to reflect their brand values, or how
definitely?
Does that work?
Wembley, I have to say, is that it's a bit of a nuance in terms of how we're kind of set up. And actually, this is a very pivotal week for us, or pivotal fortnight, because as you will all know, the stadium is potentially going to be up for sale, and we will find out on the 24th of October as to whether that's going to happen or not. So we're already in the process of doing a lot of work about our brand and our brand identity. So rightly or wrongly, at the moment, we have a number of memberships which are all intrinsically linked to the room in which that membership is delivered. So your 120 is in the 120 lounge, your centre circle is in the centre circle lounge, so on and so forth. If we sell the stadium, that lounge could be called something else. It could be the Pepsi Cola lounge, it could be the Pizza Hut lounge, it could be anything. It probably won't, but it could potentially become that. So what we're doing at the moment is working through actually linking our memberships to the experience, which is the right thing to do anyway. So what that 120 name could become will be more delivered to the experience that we're trying to sort of get on the event day rather than the actual space itself. So it's a whole process. It's been a very slow process. But as I say, I think it's the right thing for us to do. So it doesn't matter whether you're coming to an England game, it doesn't matter whether you're coming to see the Eagles or somebody else who's going to be at the stadium in the next sort of 12 months. You're going to be very assured of the experience that you're going to get, because the ticket you're buying is directly linked to what that experience is.
Yeah. Okay.
So watch this space, people, watch this space.
Can I ask a question in terms of, Stadia employs a lot of temporary staff.
Yeah.
So people will turn up just for the day, work for the event and disappear. So how do you go about putting these sort of behaviours and sort of guidelines to people that are just agency staff that turn up?
That's a really good question. So, I mean, all you can do is obviously try. So some of the things that we do is kind of put some incentives in place. So in terms of sort of loyalty and rewarding people's loyalty. So actually from our crowd safety point, you can actually accrue sort of pin badges, sort of bronze, silver, gold, and that's linked to the years of service that you've done. So we really try to kind of make sure that people see that sort of pride in coming back to the venue again and again and again. There are also aspects where there are financial incentives, so not directly sort of maybe £50, but it might be a voucher that you get. So actually if you've worked 4 events and actually you've turned up on time, dressed appropriately, and your supervisor has said that you've done a good job in terms of sort of catering, then you will receive a reward for that. So, you do have to make sure that you're sort of incentivising as part of that challenge. But equally, I think you've got to add the human element to it. And, I kind of came up through the ranks, so to speak. I started on the front line, and I know for me, I had a genuine passion about learning and training. And I think when you kind of give people the opportunity to learn more, you'll be really surprised that actually people really want it. So in fact, Tasha was telling me a great story about sort of, somebody in a car park who was been there for years, very disgruntled person. And actually the minute a conversation was had with that gentleman about his behaviour and the impact of his behaviour, all of a sudden it was a light bulb moment. And he kind of got his place in the bigger picture. And that person's attitude changed. So, again, it's just taking the time to make sure that we are investing in our staff, and our staff will reward you.
And I think at Wembley, for example, one of the things you do well is, to do training with the stewards, for example, to explain to them, how much it is that people are paying for these products. And again, going back to that brand and going back and explaining to them, it's not someone who's just got a season ticket. This is our premium customer, and the way we want you to treat them is slightly different. Anyone else?
Any more questions?
I think everyone's getting hungry now. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for listening to us.